Hello, friends. Today's topic is Gen Z and their struggle. Let's rant.
Earlier, I was having a conversation about the younger generation, like Generation Z, and specifically how like a lot of them are struggling with, I guess you can say, just finding their way in the world, finding their lane, finding their path. I have a video that went viral where I was talking about going through college, and at the time I didn't feel like it was worth it when I was in my younger 20s and just feeling discouraged and feeling like, I was going to take the easy way out and I was going to run it up and get a business and just like, I didn't really need a 9 to 5, all of those things. Go watch the video. And someone had shared with me in this conversation that they had sent this video to someone who was in an age group because they felt like that person kind of needed the encouragement and the motivation because they're kind of like straddling, and dealing with the same thing I was dealing with, essentially, with kind of wanting to drop out and so on and so forth. I was like saying in this conversation that, I feel so bad for the younger generation, specifically for Generation Gen Z, because they are a generation who has been so, oh my gosh, how can I even say this? They have been growing up in a time where they have so much external influence at a different level than we ever did, right? Like, we always had TV, we always had, the internet, but where the internet now is, specifically with social media and the influence that they are getting from celebrities and influencers, is crazy. Like, it's one thing to, go out into the world and you get influenced, whatever, but it's another thing to pick up your phone and to constantly be influenced and to constantly being told you're not doing enough, constantly being told that you should be rich, or you should be making 6 figures when you're 20 years old. Like, the unrealistic standards that they are constantly seeing on a daily is mind-boggling. I think it can be really frustrating to us older generations when we see this, because it's like we're advocating for them, right? Like, we're motivating them to understand that, like, there's more out here for you. There's so much you can accomplish. There's so much you can get done and do. But it's so hard. This is a point that I was making in the conversation, when although we are motivating them, and although they may have older siblings or parents that are saying, no, you can go to college, you can, do all of these things, but do it the right way. You know what I mean? Or don't take the hard route where you a bum and then 5 years from now you're going to be wondering why you didn't just listen to everybody. But it's so hard because it's like we aren't the only voices in their head anymore. We're actually competing against all of these influencers and all of these celebrities who are basically telling them the complete opposite of what they're being told in their homes. And I don't have no kids, but I have a younger sibling and I have younger cousins. I have nieces and nephews. And I mean, they're not old, but for younger cousins and my younger sibling, like, I can see how much social media is really influencing their thoughts and their decisions and their behaviors and their choices. And it's kind of like sad to watch in a way, because what we came to the conclusion of in our conversation and just in general is that, like, they aren't thinking for themselves. Like, they really are letting other people tell them how to think and what is okay, not even understanding that they have a mind of their own and that they can use it. And I think that is really scary, especially when we're shifting into a time of AI and such extreme propaganda. It's like, you have a brain and it works, but it's almost as if they're not using it because what's being populated into their brain isn't even their own thought. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's a scary time we live in.
There have been all these videos about how Gen Z is not good in the workplace and how they're getting fired at alarming rates and how people are trying to hire baby boomers over Gen Zs. It is so crazy because I feel like a few years ago, Gen Z brought up a lot of good points when it comes to working in corporate America. And I am like a millennial or zillennial, so like I'm right at the cusp. But I definitely align more with millennial in the workplace specifically, especially because of the expectations and what I knew the corporate world was going to be like and my exposure to it in college. I've worked alongside Gen Zs who aren't like at the college or corporate level, just like everyday people. And I can fully understand why these people are not hiring them. When I look online and I see most of the people who are talking about how they feel about the fact that companies are not hiring Gen Z, most of them are Gen Z. And the overwhelming reason as to why it's an issue is because there are issues in the workplace, or there are issues in these places, and people don't want to work with these outdated, ways of doing business. And I feel like that perfectly describes Gen Z in the workplace. This is a group of people who have not entered the workplace, or who are just barely entering the workplace. And their reason for acting the way that they act is because it's a flawed system. How do you know it's a flawed system if you have never been in the system? You come into the system assuming it's flawed because it's not easy, or it has some sort of difficulty that you don't want to experience. And rather than learning and adjusting and working with the environment which generations before you have learned to do, they didn't just wake up and decide, oh, I'm gonna do corporate America this way. They've learned to work with these companies. So if you come into a space thinking, oh, I do this, so they do that. Oh, they said work starts at 9, therefore I can't come in from an 8:30 meeting because I have to go to the gym. Like, good luck. Working is not fair. You get fired, like, you don't get raises. Like, it's not the judicial system, and even that is not. I would challenge y'all to think about these systems from the inside before you start judging them and assuming that they're messed up because they were made from a generation that was not you.
Average millennial is 36 years old. They can't afford to buy the house. So therefore, their future self is poorer. If they think of how much of the stock market they can buy less with their money. They have less savings. They've got debts from university. So they don't have the ability to get out of this trap. And then what you're finding is because of this, they're having to live with other people into their 30s. They don't have kids and they don't get married. And these numbers have collapsed since 1983. You've seen these numbers come down from people living on their own. So i.e. you could get your job, get yourself an apartment. Has gone from 80% to 62%. You're seeing the marriage rate halve. You see then the same cohort of kids in their 30s doing 2 jobs, 3 jobs, 4 jobs. That's not because they want to. Nobody wants to work 12-hour days, 7 days a week. It's because they have to. And their parents, the baby boomers, never had that. They were the richest generation the world had ever seen. So this is the first generation that won't be as rich as their parents. And that's a weird thing because we're all used to human progress, the American dream. If the American dream is, well, you'll never be as wealthy as your parents, and they were middle-class people and I'm now less well off than them, that's kind of...
Today's world is hard, no lie, but you have to make it work. It takes time, but we know hard work in the long run makes a difference.
So you've probably heard a lot about how Gen Z is like struggling financially more than any other generation, how they'll never get ahead, and how hard it is to build wealth. But economic data shows that this generation is doing financially better than generations before. So where's this discrepancy coming from? I'm a certified financial planner, and I also study money psychology, and I don't really want to focus too much actually on the economic data. I want to focus on the psychology behind why Gen Z feels this way about their money. And personally, I feel like social media plays a huge role in that in a way that hasn't affected other generations because social media wasn't around until very recently. So obviously Gen Z was the first generation to really grow up with social media, and in many ways it's their first touch point to a lot of things. Like a lot of Gen Z gets their news from TikTok. And in the same way, it's their first interaction almost like with the economy and like economic data. So a lot of people are getting their impressions about how the economy is doing from social media instead of looking at economic indicators or economic data, that sort of thing. And we all know on TikTok, it's all over the place. Like you'll see people posting $1,000 shopping hauls, mega mansions, and then the next video will be someone saying that they can't afford their groceries for the week. And that creates this like whiplash effect that makes users very confused about what is actually going on in the economy. And the way that TikTok works, it's kind of hard to see what like the benchmark is, like how the average person actually feels about the economy. Instead, you're just seeing hundreds and hundreds of different opinions, and it can be hard to know like who is actually considered average and who is kind of on those like outliers. And I definitely don't have enough time to talk about the psychological effects of social media on your personal finances, but it can have a huge role in shaping how you feel about your money and even like the economy at large. There's actually a word for it. It's called money dysphoria, and it's basically a warped financial perception of how the economy or how you are particularly doing. And I totally agree that like broad economic numbers aren't always the most helpful when it comes to thinking about how you actually feel about the economy. Like a low unemployment rate isn't going to matter to you if you don't have a job and you're struggling to find a job. And I'll caveat to say I'm kind of in that sweet spot between millennial and Gen Z, so I kind of relate to both generations in a certain way. And I'll just say that I think this is also just a sign of the confusion that comes with your 20s. Like a lot of times you're struggling with an identity crisis. You don't know what you want to do with your life. You're trying to find meaning and purpose. And I think, social media plays a huge influence on that. And I think the same goes for your finances and how financially secure you feel.
A lot of millennials and Gen Z are struggling to pay off debt and save up for retirement because of how expensive housing is. But it's going to stay expensive because we're still under a system of zoning laws that was created decades ago that's holding us all back. Zoning laws determine what can be built on a certain plot of land, so basically whether it can be used for like retail or whether it can be used for residential housing. But most importantly, it determines whether you can build multifamily housing in that area or just single family housing in that area. And that's how we ended up in the scenario we're in. When our country first started to phase out explicitly racist language from our zoning laws, it still kept Black and brown people out of the suburbs by preventing the building of apartments and townhomes because Black and brown people were more likely to have a multi-generational family that needed the extra rooms. And they did things to drive up the initial sale price so that poorer people couldn't move into those neighborhoods. So they would have things like a minimum lot size requirement. So you couldn't even build unless it had a certain amount of land, and that would automatically make it more expensive. And it's created a scarcity problem where now our suburbs are full of expensive homes that people can't really afford to move into. And any solution to build multifamily affordable housing has to be put into cities that were previously racially segregated and are still to this day defunded, under-resourced, and have worse schools and higher rates of crime.
What can you do when life is kicking you? Keep pushing, and I know it sucks, but keep pushing forward and your reward is waiting for you. Thanks for watching. Until next time.